You knew you were right, and you still lost. Not lost the way you lose a game, where the score is clear and both sides agree on what happened. Lost the way you lose ground in a fog. You're still standing, technically, but somehow the conversation ended with you on the defensive, and they walked away certain. And you drove home running the same exchange through your head, trying to figure out where it went wrong. Maybe it was your son-in-law at Thanksgiving. Maybe it was a colleague who graduated from a university that seems to have replaced philosophy with a political catechism. Maybe it was your own adult child, who now speaks a language that sounds like English but operates by rules you were never taught. You laid out the evidence. You cited history. You appealed to reason. And at some point you watched their eyes go flat, not with confusion, but with a kind of patient contempt, as though you had just proven, beyond any doubt, that you were exactly the kind of person they had already decided you were. And you knew you were right. That's the part that stays with you. There is a name for what happened in that conversation. And the name is not you lost the argument. The name is you brought a hammer to a surgery. The problem was never the quality of your reasoning. The problem was the instrument. Tonight I want to show you why logic alone fails against a modern ideologue, not because logic is weak, but because it is being applied to the wrong layer of the problem. And then I want to show you the tool that Plato's Socrates used to dismantle confident bad ideas without ever raising his voice, without ever insulting his interlocutor, and without ever needing to win the argument in the conventional sense. Before this video is over, you'll have a real-world script, specific questions in plain English that you can use the next time you find yourself in that conversation. The tool is called Socratic irony. It is 2,400 years old. And it has never been more necessary than it is right now. Let's start with the failure, because the failure is instructive. You've been trying to reach your interlocutor at the level of conclusions. Their conclusion is that your values are wrong, or that the tradition you belong to is a vehicle for oppression, or that the questions you think are open have already been settled and settled against you. And your instinct, the entirely reasonable instinct of a man trained to think, is to attack the conclusion directly. You produce evidence. You point to history. You name the contradictions. You are, by any fair measure, making a real argument. And it bounces. Here is why. What you are up against is not a conclusion that happens to be wrong. What you are up against is a position that has been fused with an identity. And that changes everything. When a belief functions as a conclusion, the result of reasoning, even imperfect reasoning, it can be revised by counter-evidence. When a belief functions as identity, when I believe this has become this is who I am, it cannot be revised by argument because argument is no longer the relevant category. To challenge the belief is to challenge the person. And the person, quite naturally, defends themselves. This is not unique to your ideological opponents. It is a feature of human psychology, but it has become the dominant mode of political and moral discourse in our time. And Alan Bloom saw it clearly in 1987 when he wrote The Closing of the American Mind. What Bloom observed in the American university was a generation being trained not to think, but to commit, to take positions, to identify with those positions, and to treat the questioning of those positions as a form of aggression. The professors called it openness. Bloom called it the closing that wears the face of opening. What this means for your dinner table is specific and important. Your interlocutor is not refusing to think. They are operating inside a framework in which being questioned feels, genuinely and viscerally, like being attacked. Their immune system is functioning exactly as designed. Logic does not penetrate an immune response. It activates it. So what does reach them? That is the question this video is built around. And the answer came from Athens, roughly 430 years before the birth of Christ. Let me tell you what Socrates was actually doing. The standard image of Socrates is the marble bust in the philosophy classroom. The wise old man who asked questions because he genuinely didn't know the answers. The humble seeker who knew only that he knew nothing. It is a beautiful image. It is also, at least in part, a misreading. In Plato's Apology, Socrates gives his own account of the method. He has been told by the oracle at Delphi that no man is wiser than Socrates. He is baffled by this. He does not think of himself as wise, so he sets out to find someone wiser than himself. He goes to the politicians, the poets, the craftsmen, the men who are widely regarded as knowing things, and he questions them. He asks them to explain what they know. And in every case, he discovers that the man who is considered wise cannot, when pressed, give an account of why he believes what he believes. The conviction is real. The foundation is not there. Socrates does not arrive at these conversations genuinely ignorant. He arrives, having already thought about the question more carefully than his interlocutor. The feigned ignorance, "I am just a simple man trying to understand," is a strategic posture. It is designed to give the interlocutor the floor, to allow them to lay out their position in full, and then gently, relentlessly, to expose the contradiction at the center of it. This is Socratic irony, not deception in the malicious sense. A performative stance, adopted deliberately, that allows the questioner to examine a position from below rather than attacking it from above. You do not say you are wrong. You say, "Help me understand. What do you mean by that?" And then you ask what they mean by what they mean. And then you ask what they mean by that. Soren Kierkegaard, writing in 1841 in The Concept of Irony, made a distinction that matters here. He argued that Socratic irony is not a rhetorical technique, not a clever move you deploy to win a debate. It is an existential stance. It is the posture of a man who takes ideas seriously enough to examine them, who is secure enough in his own thinking that he does not need to dominate the conversation, and who understands that the exposure of a false foundation is more productive than the demolition of a false conclusion. Kierkegaard saw Socrates not as a debater, but as a man who had made a way of living out of the examined question. I want to hold that distinction because it matters for what comes next. What I am describing is not a trick. It is a discipline. It requires genuine patience, genuine curiosity about what the other person actually means, and genuine willingness to follow the question wherever it goes. The man who uses Socratic irony as a rhetorical club, who feigns ignorance not to understand but to humiliate, loses access to the method's real power. And his interlocutor will sense it. But for the man who can hold the posture honestly, who genuinely wants to understand the foundation, not merely to expose its absence, this tool is nearly irresistible, because it cannot be answered with an accusation of bad faith. It can only be answered by doing the thing the modern ideologue has rarely been asked to do: explain why he believes what he believes. Did it actually work? Not just in theory, in practice, against a real interlocutor, in a real conversation. Book 1 of Plato's Republic opens with a man named Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus is a sophist, a professional intellectual, a man paid to argue, a man with a confident and fully articulated theory of justice. His theory is this: justice is whatever serves the interest of the stronger. The powerful make the rules. The rules are called justice, and anyone who pretends otherwise is being naive. It is, incidentally, a theory that would feel entirely at home in a graduate seminar in political science today. Thrasymachus does not enter the conversation tentatively. He storms in, dismissive, contemptuous of the men already talking. He has heard the pieties about justice and virtue, and he is done with them. He knows how things actually work. Socrates greets him warmly. He is delighted, he says, that a man of such wisdom has joined them. He himself has been struggling with the question of justice and finding himself quite unable to settle it. Perhaps Thrasymachus could explain it to him. Thrasymachus explains it. Socrates listens carefully. Then he asks a question, not a challenge, a question. If the ruler commands something that turns out not to serve his own interest, makes a miscalculation, passes a bad law, is the subject still obligated to obey? If justice is what serves the stronger, and the stronger has made an error, then following the command is unjust by the ruler's own definition. Thrasymachus adjusts. Socrates asks another question, and another. At each step he is not arguing, he is clarifying. He wants to understand precisely what Thrasymachus means. He wants to make sure he has it right before he accepts it. By the end of the exchange, Thrasymachus has contradicted himself 3 times, grown visibly agitated, accused Socrates of bad faith, and been unable to demonstrate that his own position is coherent. He leaves the conversation unable to defend what he arrived certain of. Socrates did not raise his voice. He did not call Thrasymachus wrong. He did not produce counter-evidence or cite competing authorities. He asked what Thrasymachus meant, and what he meant by that, and what he would say if this were the case, until the position could not hold its own weight. That is elenchus. That is the method. And the reason I am spending this much time on Thrasymachus is that he is sitting at your dinner table. Not the same man, not the same vocabulary, but the same structure. A position held with complete confidence, never examined at the level of premises, reinforced by a social world that treats the confidence itself as evidence of sophistication. The ancient script applies, and it is waiting for you. Before I give you that script, before the specific questions in plain English that you can carry into your next conversation, I want to say one more thing about what this tool costs the man who uses it seriously. Leo Strauss, reading Plato carefully over decades, came to understand the Socratic philosopher's role in a city not merely as intellectual, but as civic. The philosopher who examines the city's unexamined assumptions is not performing a hostile act. He is performing, in Strauss's reading, the most genuinely protective act available to a political community. Because a community whose foundational beliefs cannot survive examination is a community built on sand. The examination is not an attack on the foundation. It is a test of whether the foundation is real. This framing matters for how you go into your next conversation. You are not trying to win. You are not trying to humiliate. You are performing, in the most literal sense, a Socratic service. You are asking the question that a community of examined minds requires. Whether your interlocutor experiences it that way is a separate matter, but the posture changes you, and the change is visible. The man who argues wants to defeat. The man who questions wants to understand. That difference is not subtle. Your interlocutor will feel it within 30 seconds of the first question, and it is precisely what keeps the conversation from becoming a battle. Now, there is a companion to what I have been building here. The tradition that produced Socratic irony, from the Republic through Augustine, through the natural law philosophers, through Bloom, is a tradition most of us were never formally introduced to. If you want a plain language entry point into that tradition, the core argument of each foundational text, the key passage, the one question it raises for a man living today, the link in the description takes you to the Great Books Cheat Sheet. 10 books, 10 one-page summaries built for the intelligent reader who wants the map before committing to the territory. It is called the Great Books Cheat Sheet, and the link is in the description. Here is the inversion I promised you. You have been asking the wrong question. Not in your life, in your arguments. The question you have been asking is, how do I prove they're wrong? It is a reasonable question. It is the question that produces evidence, citations, historical analogies, scriptural references. It is also the question that bounces off the ideology as identity model like a stone off glass. The Socratic question is different. The Socratic question is, what would have to be true for your position to be correct? That is not a rhetorical move. It is a genuine philosophical shift from the evaluation of conclusions to the examination of premises. And it changes everything about how the conversation unfolds. Because here is what C.S. Lewis identified in The Abolition of Man, and what Strauss identified in his own way, and what Socrates demonstrated in the life he lived and the death he accepted. A position that cannot be examined at the level of premises is not actually a position. It is an assertion. Assertions can be made with great confidence. They can be made in the language of science, or the language of history, or the language of compassion. But an assertion is not an argument. And an assertion held as identity cannot survive the question, what would have to be true for this to be right? Modern ideologue, when pressed at this level, does one of three things. He produces a foundation, in which case you have a real conversation and you may both learn something. He retreats into accusation, in which case the conversation is over, but you have not lost it. You have exposed that there was no foundation defined. Or he changes the subject, in which case you follow him gently and ask the same question about the new subject. None of these outcomes requires you to win in the conventional sense. All of them require your interlocutor to do something they have rarely been asked to do. And that, over time, is the work. So here is the script. These are not tricks. They are the Socratic questions, translated into the register of a contemporary American conversation. Use them in sequence, slowly, with genuine curiosity in your voice. The tone is the method. If it sounds like a cross-examination, you have already lost the posture. When they state a conclusion as self-evident, you say, help me understand what you mean by that. I want to make sure I have it right before I respond. This does two things. It signals respect. You are not dismissing them. And it requires them to articulate a position they may have only ever asserted. Articulation exposes premises. When they have articulated a position, you say, what would have to be true for that not to be the case? I'm trying to understand the boundaries of the argument. This is the foundational question. It asks them to identify the conditions under which they would be wrong. A position held as identity has no answer to this question. A position held as examined belief does. You will learn immediately which one you are dealing with. When they appeal to consensus or authority, you say, "That's interesting. How did you come to hold that view?" I'm curious what led you there, not the conclusion, but the reasoning. This is the most disarming of the three because it is the most personal. You are not questioning the conclusion, you are asking about the journey. Most people have never been asked this. Most people find it, if done with genuine warmth, unexpectedly moving. And the answer almost always reveals that the position was received, not examined. When they become frustrated, you say, "I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm trying to understand what you actually think." That's rarer than it sounds. This is the Socratic reassurance. It is true. And it almost always returns the conversation to a lower temperature because it reframes what you are doing. You are not their opponent. You are the first person today who wanted to know what they actually think, not just what side they are on. I want to close with something that is easy to miss in a video about intellectual technique. Socrates was tried for impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens. He was given the option to leave the city, to stop asking his questions, to find a quiet corner of the ancient world, and live out his days without bothering anyone. He declined. He drank the hemlock. He died at the age of 70, defending the examined life in the city that had built itself around the unexamined one. I am not suggesting that your Thanksgiving dinner carries the same stakes, but I am suggesting that the impulse behind Socrates, refusal, the conviction that a community that cannot examine its own foundations is a community in quiet decay, is not a philosophical abstraction. It is the thing you have been feeling for years, without a name for it. You were not losing those arguments because you were wrong. You were fighting with the wrong weapon, on the wrong level, against the wrong layer of the problem. The frustration was the signal. Your instincts were tracking something real. There is a difference between a man who argues and a man who questions. The man who argues wants to win the room. The man who questions wants to find the floor, the actual foundation on which a belief rests, or the absence of a floor where a foundation should be. The first man is exhausting to be around. The second man is, to the right kind of mind, unforgettable. Socrates was ugly, by ancient accounts. He was poor. He held no office and wrote nothing. What he had was the question. And 24 centuries after his death, we are still having the conversation he started. You are not watching a crisis. You are watching an arrival. The ideas that are dismantling your world did not appear last year. They have a genealogy, and genealogies can be traced. And what can be traced can be named, and what can be named can be questioned. That's where you come in. If there is one conversation, one moment where you put down the argument and picked up the question instead, tell me what happened. I want to know who you were talking to and what the question was. The link for the Great Books cheat sheet is in the description.